Meeting the polar bear in the car park. This was the phrase that my hypnotherapy tutor, David Newton, used to describe in many ways the basis from which the system of solution-focused hypnotherapy worked, to explain in a way the responses that we want to move away from, that we need in a way, but we don't want too much of in modern life. So let's look at this and our responses to the Covid-19 situation that has held us all in our homes, or at least even those who are essential workers have been at home in their off hours, far more than would be usual. So to come back to this phrase of meeting the polar bear in the car park, this was used to describe our reactions in times of stress, our reactions to a surprising event that acted upon us and certainly in the beginning, in that immediate instant, in a negative way. So what would happen if we were to meet a polar bear in the car park? We would panic. We would scurry for safety. We would lock ourselves in our cars. We would do whatever we could to get safe, because that is the biological imperative at the base of our existence, the strive to survive, to stay safe, to move ourselves to a position of safety. And in a situation of immediate danger, this extreme emergency button that we all have programmed within us is absolutely a helpful response when we need to take immediate action. For example, if one of us were to be walking along the street and a car suddenly goes out of control, we might just hurl ourselves into a doorway with no worries about whether in doing so we might break an arm or a leg. The imperative is to get safe, and we would all do that to the greatest extent of our own ability. So when we have something that is thrown at us, that is perceived as a threat to our existence, to our survival, or to our way of life, and we have to say that our immediate perceptions of Covid-19 certainly place us in this position, because people are worried about their loved ones, they're worried about themselves, they're worried about how they are going to earn a living as time goes on. Will that potential be damaged? What kind of world will we come out in? But all of these thoughts of the future, whilst they need thinking about, they are in a way add-ons. We only really need to focus in an emergency way on what we need to do to stay safe right now, to follow whatever guidelines we have been given by our governments, or perhaps in some circumstances, if we wish to, and if we are able to go beyond them, and not to waste our energy thinking of those other factors, those other negative add-ons. So is the analogy of a polar bear in the car park even a useful thing when we think about Covid-19? Everything in my hypnotherapy training, and in many ways my approach to life, tells me that it is. We just have to learn to understand it and make it work for us. To learn to understand how pressing that emergency button, or having it pressed for us, will actually change our responses. And some of those responses do not need to be there. When we think of it like that, and we can't just deny them, we can't just take them away. But there are ways to work creatively with that situation and to see our responses when they are not appropriate as the equivalent to responding to a polar bear in the car park. And whether we look at something like Abraham Maslow's criteria of needs, or something spiritual like the chakra system and the understanding of the base chakra as being linked to the needs of the body and our needs to survive in this world, we know that that meaning is there and it is important. But equally, when we look at the perspective from solution-focused hypnotherapy of how the mind works, we know that pressing that emergency button will make us a little bit more alert to anything that is negative. And we get these negatives all of the time. From the news that we do need to listen to, we do need to heed, but we don't need to listen to it 20 times a day as it comes into our living room, to the thoughts of what we have lost at this present time and possibly into the future. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know how this is going to operate. We don't know how this is going to end. We know that it will end, and that is important. But we also know that we have to stay in the present moment as much as we can in a time like this, because we are, in a way, at standstill in some ways. And trying to fight that, trying to use our emergency button responses, the fight, flight or freeze response. The freeze response can be a little bit useful when we need to go into hibernation. It was the freeze response that allowed our ancestors to stay in their caves when it was useful for them to do that, when it was protective for them to do that. But at the same time, we know that we feel cut off from our everyday lives, cut off from what we would normally do and the people we would normally mix with. And in most societies, in the way that people find themselves now, that isn't a threat to our immediate survival. But because we're social animals, our emergency button system can perceive it in that way until we start to think a little bit differently. So how can we do that? We can start to see our responses humorously as a response to an imaginary polar bear, or appropriate to the Stone Age, but not to 21st century life. That is a very good way of looking at it. Because when we start to think about the responses, the emergency responses, that are add-ons, because we've become a little too vigilant for danger, which is understandable at this time. But once we have done everything possible to keep safe, to keep our loved ones safe, and to do the best that we can for our society, we know that we've done all possible. And when we have done all possible, the emergency response knows how to abate when we acknowledge that fact, to abate at least to a large degree, so that we are able to do what we can do, to focus on those things that we can still enjoy doing, and to make sure that some of that is light-hearted, some of that is about humour, some of that is about staying in touch in whichever way we can, and knowing that we are actually, in the modern day world, less isolated than we were ever before. even in these times. Because if you think about it, if this were to have happened even before the internet, people would have been much more isolated. If this were to happen, as it did to some extent, and certainly then the disease process was worse in the Spanish flu epidemic, very few people had phones. People were isolated in their houses. Whole families often ill at the same time. And we are in so much better position now. And that is what we need to focus on. So how can we use self-help tips from solution-focused hypnotherapy, the understanding that underlies it, to help ourselves now? We can take an honest look at whether we need to be responding in a fearful way to some of the things that we are. Of course, we also need to acknowledge that our emergency button response is designed for quick resolution. It isn't really designed for something that takes, a few weeks or a few months, or hopefully not a few months, to resolve. So we have this ability to use our own minds creatively, to find ways to look for that which makes us feel we are focusing on the present moment, not the future, not that which might happen, so long as we're doing the very best to keep ourselves safe that we can in our individual circumstances, but to focus on what we are doing now, what we can do now. Do we have a favourite piece of music? Would we like to listen to that? Do we like meditation? Is there someone we can meet for dinner online? They can eat exactly what they want in their own home, and you can eat exactly what you want in your home. You can still put candles on the table. You can still get ready and look nice if you want. Or you can wear a nice top with your pyjama trousers on the bottom, if that is most comfortable for you. And you can get together for dinner over Skype, house party, FaceTime, and have a really nice get together and give each other the time that you deserve. We miss those hugs. We miss the physical contact. But think how much more we will appreciate those things that we took for granted when they became part of our lives again. So if we just take a moment now to reflect on all of those things that actually make us feel safer, at least to some degree at this time. To reflect on those things that have been blessings as we go through each day. It may be hearing that song on the radio, hearing the birds sing outside your window, opening the window and smelling the spring air that just floats in. And okay, we long to be out in it, and many people can't, but we can still enjoy the feelings of spring. Bring to mind photographs of springtime, memories of spring, and know that the world around us is indeed a very precious place. A place that just became a whole lot more precious because we're having to miss our capacity to explore it at the present time. And isn't that sense of preciousness, the preciousness of being with the people we want to be with, the preciousness of that which is around us, the beauties of nature that are there outside our windows, the preciousness of knowing that the healthcare workers are truly going beyond the call of duty and doing a majestic job for those in need. And knowing that in finding ways to switch off our emergency buttons, to a great extent, at least some of the time, if not more of the time, we know that we are becoming the best that we can be. Because when we operate under the emergency button, we live very much in reaction. Our focus of consciousness is narrowed because our threat perception system is heightened. And yet, when we find ways to feel safe, to feel that we are doing our best in the current circumstances, and that is all any of us can really say. If we look back through life, if we look back through the generations, we can all see that my generation, the one that came after it, the one that came after that, the people that are around sort of 9, 10 years old now, in fact, all of the generations that lived since the Second World War, certainly in many parts of Europe, have had a perception of safety in their lives that previous generations just didn't have. So is it no wonder sometimes that people overreact a little bit to threat, not in the initial instance, but in the way they allow that perception of threat to live too strongly within their minds, to extend its fingers of reach too far across the different realms of thought that float through every mind in every day. So let's reflect on what we can do, to think creatively, to find things that are blessings as we go through each and every day, and to feel safe when there is no immediate cause for concern, and to send out, if we believe in such things, and I certainly do, thoughts and prayers to all of those who are in need at this time, whether they are people whose actions we agree with or disagree with. I personally don't think much of Boris Johnson, but I was still very sorry to hear that he had been admitted to intensive care. So we have to have thoughts not just for ourselves, but of others, and that is helpful to us, seeing the wider picture, but at the same time finding a balance between what is happening and concern about what might be, and feeling safe, and finding those things that make us feel that we are our more creative selves. Finding ways to put the part of our minds that knows how to create positive thought, relaxation, nice, helpful, calm and kind emotions back in the driving seat, so that we can say to that polar bear that pressed our emergency button at whatever time that the coronavirus took off in our country and things started to be concerning and actions had to be taken, that we can see that yes, that the system that is dealing with it is ongoing, and yes, it is a reality that some people will encounter difficult circumstances and emotional loss and the loss of loved ones. But we also know that most people will be very fortunate. It's a comparatively small percentage of the population that we need to be worried about. And actions have been taken Whether you agree with those exact actions or not is not so important at this time. That could well be a subject for debate later on. But actions have been taken that do indeed make us safer. And that is something to be grateful for. Many have drawn an analogy with war, but this is not a war situation. We are not under attack from weapons of war in the way that our fairly recent ancestors were. That is not something that is happening. So taking away the war analogy is a good one. Looking at this as something, as a solution that is being worked for, is much more positive. And yes, there is one part of us that might well be called upon to fight: our immune systems. And our immune systems, according to many different scientific studies, not just the ones that were slotted into my hypnotherapy training, confirm that when we find ways to switch off our emergency button and to relax and to find things to be grateful for, that our bodies work better, our minds work better, and that includes our immune systems. So that is one thing that we can all work creatively with, along with all of the steps that our governments are asking us to take at this time. And there are many ways that each one of us can learn to switch off or dramatically turn down that emergency button. And if it's difficult, try to do it first of all for a few minutes, then half an hour, then an hour, then a longer period of time. And the way to do this is to focus on something that brings you peace, entertainment, relaxation, or some form of bliss, even if that is only for a short time. And then we find that those moments, those blissful moments, those peaceful moments, those moments of humour or entertainment, they kind of join together and have more and more of an influence. And then we find that we don't react so strongly in an emergency way to something that in the present moment isn't an emergency. And it doesn't matter what we feel about the situation. We can all find ways to feel a little bit better. And yes, also to look forward with hope. We might not know exactly what it is we are hoping for, but to have the kind of faith, and here I think a wartime analogy is a good one, to have the kind of faith that when this ends, there will be much to be grateful for, much to feel hopeful about, even though we don't exactly know what it is at the moment that we feel hopeful about. And if anyone listening to this would like an online session of solution-focused hypnotherapy that is tailor-made for them to help them to cope in these difficult times, or to help them find their relaxation response, I am very happy for you to contact me. Thank you for the pleasure of your company.